Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Red Brick Summit 2021, we welcome you all to this session of the TRBS Speaker Series. This is our second ever virtual TRBS, and we are honored to host Ms. Nishtha Satyam. She's appointed as the head of office for Timor-Leste in UN Women, the entity of the United Nations that is dedicated to working towards gender equality and women's empowerment, in September 2021. She was the former deputy country representative for UN Women in India. She is a trained economist and a winner of the Times 40 Under 40 award in 2021. Kangana Pandya, a second year MBA student, will be our moderator for today. She is a lawyer and the coordinator of IIM's Students Against Sexual Harassment Club. She's also a member of the Women Leadership Society. Over to you, Kangana.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here, ma'am. So we just wanted to get to know a little more about you. How come you chose to go to East Timor after India?
Thanks, Kangana. That's actually, I'm glad that you asked that question. I was hoping that you'd ask that question. I chose the UN because I wanted to be on the field. And like it's very, it's famously said that the greatest benefit or the greatest joy of working for an organization like the UN is being on the field and being where people need you. I wanted to work in a country which is new in its independence, where one could work on policy, work on the ground, and in a country that's also a difficult duty station. I think it's been a dream. I have worked extensively in the South Asia context, but I really wanted to expand my knowledge of the ground to the Pacific. So I think East Timor was just a natural choice for me when it was offered.
Oh, all right. That's quite interesting. Thank you. And so, ma'am, how did you get into gender equity, and about what are the challenges you currently think that women are facing, and what changes you expect to see in the near future?
Oh, Kangana, those are many questions rolled into one, and it would take me a long time to answer all of them. But let me work backwards from the last question that you asked. What is the change that we want to see? It's exactly the change that probably you want to see. So I'm no different really, just because I'm coming from a space. I think the change that we all want to see, irrespective of where we come, is a world that stands for equality. It's a world that is equal in the opportunities, that it offers a world that rewards equally, that recognizes equally, and also a world that has the same barriers for you and me and someone else. The collective vision of the world is to achieve gender equality by 2030, which is the Sustainable Development Goals that all member countries of the UN have come together and agreed to. Now, if you and I did nothing differently from what we did yesterday, which means, Kangana, if you exactly had the same kind of day that you had yesterday, and I exactly had the same kind of day that I have today, we are looking at gender equality as a possibility only in 2089. The vision that the world has set for itself is 2030. So we have to supersede ourselves by half a century, which I think is pretty ambitious. But nonetheless, it's a goal that we have set for ourselves that nobody has given us. So hopefully we're on that trajectory. Now the question is, are we on that trajectory? As of today, there is not a single country in the world, by its own admission, by its own statistics, by its own measurement, which can claim itself to be a gender equal country. And that also somewhere is the tragedy of the world per se today. So yes, we are on that tragedy, but yes, just a situation like COVID that has kind of deepened inequalities that existed, where women are still at the margins of the economy. Women are still the first ones to be on informal contracts, to lose jobs. Women's unpaid care work at home has gone up by almost 30 to 40% across the globe. Violence against women has gone up by 30%, 35% across the globe. So yes, are we on that trajectory? Yes, in our vision, mission, and ambition, we are. Are we on that trajectory in terms of the money that we need to commit to gender equality? Well, no, honestly, I think the world has fallen short, and COVID, unfortunately, has reversed progress by many years, and we're yet to know that. We're yet to go out in the world and know what COVID has costed us, but it certainly has cost us a lot. So if I have to be honest, I'm a little worried about where we are as a country, about where we are as the world. And India is not in any isolation. But we set ourselves up for a dream? Yes, we have. What are issues that women facing? Unfortunately, the answers that I would give you in 1989 versus the 2000s versus 2021 are not very different. The challenges in essence of the structural barriers to gender equality remain the same over century: access to equal opportunities, access to equal rewards, the same kind of risks, the same kind of stereotypes. The challenges are the same. It's the challenges that I face as an empowered woman, as you face as a student, or somebody who's aspiring really to go out in the world and make a change, versus someone from rural India. There is a universality in the challenges, in the gender challenges that the world faces. But today, I think the greatest problem of the world is that most of recorded history is one big gender data gap. And we will talk about it in the questions to come. The challenges today, again, let me make it clear, are not just unique to women. I think they're a gender issue, which means it applies to men as much as it applies to us. Is stereotyping, access to the workforce, access to the formal workforce, access to leadership. But to me, the principal problem of women in the world itself is women's representation and participation in decision making, because that alone stands a good chance, if we solve it, to change a lot of how the world looks at problems. And I think we'll talk about it more on how, as the world, we need to problematize better. But I'm going to stop at that.
Okay, well, that was very interesting. And I think we dived into a lot of issues that women are currently facing, especially with the pandemic. So is there anything that you would recommend or suggest for all of us as management students to do, where we could actually try and bridge this divide, or any steps that we could take, any material that we could read?
Well, absolutely. There's always something that one can do as a participating citizen, right? And as management students, as one of even the most premier institutions of the country, I think there's a lot that you can do. And one very big area, like I said, that the world, most of recorded human history is one big gender data gap. Starting with the theory of the man-hunter, the chronicles of the past, they've really left very little space for women's role in the evolution of humanity. When it comes to the lives of the other half of humanity, you usually see silence, and that silence is everywhere. Our entire culture is riddled with him. We all know women participated in history. Women were a part of making India. How many do you know of, right? How many come to your mind? How many images come to your mind? So I think it's very important to go back to say, what our history books tell us? And let me give you a very interesting stat about the missing data gap. The gender data gap, as we understand, is not just about the silence that I'm talking about. It's also about consequences. And it is consequences for management students. Because what we know today is that 90% of consumption decisions in the household are made primarily by women or influenced very strongly by women. But what do we know about the women that we sell to? What do we know about the women that what do we know about half of humanity? Because you see, the knowledge that we have today, the default setting that we have today is the male setting. Today, India is one of the largest producer of COVID equipment and of PPE kits, right? But there is not a single manufacturer, despite the fact there's not a single manufacturer of PPE kits that is making a PPE kit designed for the average size of the woman, despite the fact that 60% of secondary healthcare is administered by women. So there's definitely a big gap between what we know and what we think we know and what we should be knowing to be able to program better for half of humanity. And to me, there is a management cost to not knowing that riddle. There is a management cost to keeping it as a result, a riddle. So I think as management students, the first and foremost intervention that you can make is in research. in this area is, what do we not know? What is that missing data about these invisible women that are scattered along the spectrum? How can we as decision makers, as management students, when we go to work, be better managers based on what we know, right? We know that women influence a lot of household automotive decisions, which is which car to buy. But you will not see a single car that's built for women or with women in mind. There's not a single seat belt that caters to a pregnant woman, right? So women are currently automatically trying to fit into what has been designed for the male prototype. I think we have to design a world that is more inclusive, and that involves management decisions, that involves research, that involves marketing better, that involves speaking to those and hearing those voices that we have not heard till today. And I think that's a huge burden on management students today, is how do you include half of humanity, half of those who hold the sky? So it's not a small burden. It looks like something small and trivial, but it's to me, it's one of the largest costs that the world has had to pay.
Absolutely, ma'am. And I think you did mention a lot about marketing towards women, and it's mostly majorly just household products or beauty care. And it's rarely actually looking at the needs of what a woman may require or may need. And so, is there something you would recommend to even the media out there, where the roles given to women are largely ceremonial and they don't really play substantial roles in media? What would you want or expect the media industry, and do you see change that has happened over the past few years in media towards women or people in general?
Well, again, those are many questions altogether. Well, honestly, do I see change in the media industry? Well, yes and no, right? Women are more at the forefront. When I was growing up, Barkha was reporting the Kargil ball from right at the forefront. And for at that time, for me, who was growing up, it was a dream to switch on the TV and see an Indian war reporter who was a woman. And nobody had thought that a woman would transgress those lines, jump into reporting. Has there been change from there? Yes. The question that we must ask ourselves is, are we changing at the rate that we should be changing? The obvious answer to that is no. You still see that lifestyle beats are covered by women. All the soft frill music, cinema is covered by women. But when it comes to, when you see someone discussing petrol hikes, when you see someone discussing things that matter to the economy, not that the others don't, the mainstream media is majorly still occupied by the male perspective, if not by men. So we actually do a very interesting study every year annually with an outfit called the News Laundry, which is run by Teamwork Arts and in partnership with the News Laundry. We actually do a gender analysis of the media every year. And I must say that the results are not very encouraging in terms of prime time occupation, in terms of who's reading out, in terms of the beats that women cover. So yes, there is change, and there is change that is encouraging. Are we changing at the rate that we should be, and the world is changing in front of us? No, we're not. And the same biases still hold the newsroom. As far as portrayal of women in media is concerned, I'll be honest, I've been working on the issue now really for the last 8 years, and it was my area of interest even when I was a civil servant. It was my area of interest when I was in the corporate world. But even till today, when you see a rape or a crime reported, we still see that image of a girl with hands folded in front of her. So the portrayal of women has not changed drastically. We've not even been able to change that one picture as a country in a mainstream daily. And so we have a long way to go. Today, you pick up an NCERT book, you will see, you still see images of women washing utensils, of women doing some of these household chores, where the men going to work. So it's not that we're a gender equal world by default. This is a world that we have designed for ourselves, and the media has had a huge role to play. And imaging has had a huge role to play. And I think it's high time that we stand up as management students, as graduates who will be in decision-making positions to say, well, enough. We have to have a world that does not portray the male perspective as the only absolute singular mono-articulate truth, because it is going to cost us eventually, like it has so far. And there is always a cost for an economy when it's functioning at half its capacity, with half its population. And I don't think anybody is more suited to make that calculation as much as management students are. So media, again, media is a function of how and what we are as a society. And so this makes me think, what are we consuming as people of a country that the media is throwing out to us? And it's high time, I would say, for change.
Okay, absolutely. I think I couldn't agree more. And there was another question I wanted to ask you about maternity leave, where it has been applauded that maternity leave has increased for women, but there's also the argument that maternity leave actually puts women back by that many months. And so what is your perspective on that? Do you believe paternity leave is necessary, or if there are some other kind of changes that we need to make in the current atmosphere?
It's quite awful that we live in a world where maternity leave puts people back by 6 months, because why should it? There is a difference between sex and gender, and there are sex-defined roles that you and I are born with. It's not something, nobody can have a child on behalf of a woman. It's something that we are to do to keep the world functioning. It's a pretty critical function, I would think. And if playing that function is going to keep me away or put my career back by 6 months, then that is a serious judgment on the rest of the world. Now, ideally, in an ideal world, we shouldn't have had to pay a hidden cost for accessing. Maternity leave is not an entitlement; it is a right. Till the day we don't get corporate India to think of this as a right, not a frill benefit that you and I are going to get. It's not like we take a 6-month vacation and go chill and holiday and tour the world and come back from backpacking. It's an awful 6 months for women, as it is for men, actually. And I think we as economies must allow for people and their lives. However, I think the awful reality is that the world has only come thus far to thinking that women have a family life and men don't. This very conception that men are out there to be working 18 hours, do not desire to be connected with their family, really portraying them as aliens who have no other earthly connections, is an absurd concept. The paternity leave at the Bombay Stock Exchange is 1 day, a single day, 24 hours. That means you get leave to go up and sign up for the discharge slip and get your wife back from the hospital. Now, if we do not allow, until we do not allow men to be equal participants at home, gender equality is going to be an absurd, bizarre concept at the workplace. It's never going to be the norm. So if we were to make it a norm, I have to allow for men to be and play other roles, which are very, very critical in their lives, as much as I create space for women to play other critical roles. So I think this reconception of work culture to treat people as full human beings with full lives and other interests, and this is not just about maternity and paternity, this is also about being fuller human beings who have other interests, is a corporate culture that we have not yet created and we have not promoted. And also something that we have completely imbibed from the West. And I think there is a serious need to question that culture, which is why we create spaces for men to be equal participants at home. Because if you're not going to teach them equality at home, they're not going to learn equality at work. They're not bipolar beings to be one person at work and then suddenly go home and be another person. So to create that linearity of equality, we must also create equal spaces, and the starting place is home. But till we don't create that space, maternity is going to feel like an entitlement. It is going to feel like something that a corporate is owed to men, to women, right? And I'm yet waiting for that day where a man has a baby and the boss looks at him and says, my God, it's going to be so difficult to catch hold of him after this. And I think either we will reach equality that day, or we will reach equality on the day when this thought doesn't cross you for a woman. But unfortunately, her lived reality is different. And the truth is that in today's corporate culture, we have created not just these silo definitions, but we've also created these silos definitions as a society that diametrically intersect each other. So the very definition of a good of a good employee or the norm is somebody who's so dedicated to work that the person never wants to go back home. And the definition of a good mother is somebody who comes home before her child is asleep, somebody who's there for when the household needs her. Now here, right at the very defining stage, you have created two definitions that intersect each other, leave alone the implementation of this. You have created those two versions of people that don't speak to each other. And I think to me, it looks bizarre that great management experts have not been able to come up with anything better than something so ridiculous, actually. But it is these definitions of society that do not that keep women away from the workforce. For those who don't know the details, India is one of the few South Asian countries that is actually reversing women's participation in the labor force. We have almost fallen by 10 percentage points over a decade and a half, despite the fact that there are more women in education, or there are more women educating themselves than ever before. I think that's a very, very sad paradox to have for anybody who's read the Economic Survey of India. It is one of the great tragedies of India in the making, which is women's delinking with economic life. This affects economic autonomy. This affects financial independence. So I think it's time to go back to the drawing board as corporates, as management students, as professors, to see what have we got so fundamentally wrong that we do not have a world where different truths can reconcile to each other, and check ourselves to create a culture that is inclusive of all and inclusive of all in a way that it also allows men to be participants, to be the fuller beings that they're also born to be made, and that allows for people who have other interests other than just turning up to work. And I think we're yet to create that prototype job. We're yet to create that prototype culture. We have a few things to learn from Scandinavian countries, but we're far, far behind. We have to create something that suits our cultural context, that appeals to our cultural context. And honestly, India is very fortunate to be a country where there's a lot of family support still in terms of child caring and child rearing, which other countries don't have. And I think we must understand what things that are unique to our culture, that also place us uniquely to be able to actually be the lighthouse of the South, if I may call it.
Well, thank you for that, ma'am. And when you spoke about women at work declining, the exact number, could you give us a little insight into why that is happening? And other than the pandemic, what could possibly be reasons for the women in the workforce falling?
Well, this is a pre-pandemic statistic, right? And so this is nothing really to do with the pandemic. In fact, the pandemic, I would think, would have worsened things, because women, there are more women on informal contracts than men. There are more women in the gig economy per se than men. Women are more invisible on the radar of work. Now, there is no authoritative study, which is also a surprise, which is probably a suggestion that for management students to take up. There is no authoritative study to say why are women dropping out of the workforce. There is a World Bank study that points to the fact that women, because now they're more educated, are choosing not to take low value jobs any longer, right? So earlier, the barriers for entry were lower in women's minds themselves. With now women going through and investing in education, they don't want to join that call center. And the world today is not IIM Ahmedabad and UN Women. The world today, India is we don't even represent India in so many ways. And women, so that's the closest an answer comes, that an answer comes to helping us understand why women are choosing to not be part of the workforce. But there are certain research questions that problem throws. One is also, are we defining work correctly? Because we've got a very Western definition of formal work, which is you're full-time employed with a company or or somewhere, and that is considered to be work. However, India is 93% of our labor is in the informal workspace, is in the informal sector. So I think there is a fundamental need to redefine work. What do we recognize as work? And that is one of the topics that has been taken by the UN for Advocacy, which is called the future of work. Today, it's very important that we look at the future of work. I don't think we still know 60% of where India is going to live and 60% of where India is going to be employed. In a world like that, I think we must invest in understanding and redefining what is work. There is nothing called a woman, a non-working woman. There's no definition like that. All women work. It's just that when I go to a company, when I go to the UN, take off my bag and appear on a webinar, it's considered work. But when my sister or my mother or my grandmother spend 8 hours of the day trying to subsidize my cost of living by performing certain services, we don't consider that as work, right? So we have to build an economy that recognizes unpaid work so that we're able to fully judge what the economy looks like. And I know there is statistics across the globe that it would add almost 50 percentage points to what our GDP looks like if we were to count and redefine work. So to me, while we do have an answer that kind of shimmies its way through our understanding, there are major research questions that the paradox and the problem throws at us, which is defining work, understanding work, recalculating work, recognizing it, and then rewarding it. And I think that is hopefully some of you will put your hands up to do that along with us. And the current census of India, which is the one that was supposed to happen in 2021, but is happening in 2022, will also be one of the first census to use the time use survey to judge how women spend their time and to recalculate, or at least not to recalculate work, but to recognize unpaid work. And I think that will help us understand better on why women are choosing to fall out of the participation in the labor force in the way that we understand and recognize the labor force.
And what about all the women who are in the formal workforce? A lot of them don't have access to the same informal networks that men have access to. So do you believe that women could have, say, support groups or some kind of networks that they could create where they could support each other for, say, entrepreneurship or companies or organizations?
I've been in the corporate sector for a very, very long time. That's where I started my career as an economist. Now, honestly, why should we be building a world where you and I, despite the performance, have to rely on an informal network to build my career and to progress? Is a question that it's a corporate culture question. And those of you who are management experts who will go into organizational behavior probably will have a chance to look at this closely, is how do we build inclusive work cultures where I'm accountable only for the work that I do and not for what I do after work, right? But the truth is the world today stands like that and we must find a way. Now, why are women losing out on these informal networks? Is because that whole model is built on assuming that you have work and nothing else in life. Because you're going to spend the rest of your time that you're not going to work with colleagues, with those who can be colleagues, with those who can progress your career, thinking about work, talking about work. It fundamentally is based on an assumption that the primary responsibility or identity that you have is that of someone who works with a company. Now, that is very untrue of life. There are many identities that men don beyond that, as fathers, as brothers, as friends, as people, as fuller human beings, really. And the moment you start playing that roles for them too, this is going to be very unaffordable. And the reason men can do it is because women subsidize more than half of how the household runs. Right. So it's all easy to socialize when your clothes are washed and your food is taken care of and someone's carrying the emotional burden of what to cook 3 times in a day. The children are going to school, the report cards are done. It's easy to do it. I can socialize too if anybody takes away all that burden from me, right? So the idea is not to create more systems for women to succeed in ways that men have. It is to create a different metric of success and to create a world where we can succeed, where we be fuller human beings. But of course, up until that time, we will need women to participate. And honestly, I find it a little awkward that we've created these mechanisms for women to chill with women because it's not working. And let me tell you the truth. There's no point of creating these women-owned, women-managed, women-exclusive clubs, because it's still going to put us at the margins of that informal circle. What we definitely need to do is to create where women can integrate with men and other parts of their organizations, and where these informal mechanisms don't infringe, are not contradictory to the other roles that she has in life. And I think the day we create those buddy systems, those mechanisms, we will be successful. But to create these chirp clubs really, to me, are pretty useless, because you have to speak to those in power. You have to, that informality has to mean something, really. But yes, for those women in decision making, I think there's a stronger onus on them to create this culture of inclusion. And most women, some women I know, not most women, but some women who navigate through this very patriarchal setup also grow up to thinking, if I've done it, why can't she? And sometimes it's not the same story, right? It's everybody doesn't have the courage to pay the same price. Everybody doesn't have the same conducive environment to pay the same price. And so we must create cultures that are inclusive. And I think there's onus on men and women in decision-making roles to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to speak about any court judgments that you've mentioned in your upcoming book, which helped break the glass ceiling, or which were impactful in your opinion?
Well, honestly, there are so many that it's very difficult to speak about a court judgment, but I can tell you that India is one of the most progressively legislated countries in the world. We have the most strongest constitutions. We have the most liberal constitution that allows for people of different identities, different sexualities, people who identify themselves differently, men, women, binaries, non-binaries. I think what the idea of the book is not to talk about the court judgment, but the idea of the book is to talk about the stories behind the court judgment. Today, we all know the Sexual Harassment Act, but few of us know Bhavri Devi, who was actually raped when she was stopping the trafficking of a 2-year-old child as a ward member of a panchayat in Rajasthan. A few of us know that till today, many legislations, the Vishaka guidelines came out of it. And today we see the Sexual Harassment Act, which is one of the most profound pieces of legislation we have to enable equal workspaces. But seldom do we realize that justice has still not been delivered for Bhavri Devi. We do know the stories behind the Inheritance Act, but there are real women who've stood out there, who have gone through a very, very unpleasant journey, who've asked the same questions again and again till the courts have heard it. And I think the idea of the book is to socialize the stories of courage, the stories of grit, the stories of determination that today we know in the name of a legislation. You are heading the Committee for Sexual Harassment, I believe. So the story of these women, to me, are very close to my heart. So the idea of the book was to, and I'm also hoping to develop a series of podcasts, hopefully that some of you will listen into. It's not just a podcast about the law itself and stories, but also how legislations are made in countries as complex as ours. So it talks about the Inheritance Act, equal access to property. One would think that in a country like India, it's about 1 billion years old. Let me remind you that legislation came out in 2005, and we're sitting in 2021. The Criminal Amendment Act, just so many of them actually. The two-finger test, so many things that were just so contrary or that amplified the structural barriers to equality. But the stories behind them are voices of real women who've shown more courage, more grit, more attitude, more determination than any leader in the world would have, and today have made their place in history in Indian legislation. Hopefully we will read the book together. I'd be very happy to do another session with all of you on some very interesting aspects of that book.
Yes, ma'am, we'd be very happy to have you again. And thank you so much for sharing your views with us. I think my last question would be whether you have any articles or books or movies that you would like to recommend to everyone watching this. And just anything that espouses your views.
Wow, that's an interesting question. Actually, I didn't think of it. Yes, for management experts, there is this book called, well, I have it right on my table. It's called Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. There are many books which are truly feminist books. And I think you must take a moment to read it as management experts, because you are going to, hopefully, you will have the responsibility of creating a world that is more inclusive in its representation and participation, which is not just because it's a good thing to do, because it's also the smart thing to do as management experts. And hopefully you will not go on paying the costs that some of us have paid in very dysfunctionally running the world without half the population as a participant. So I'd recommend for you to pick that book up whenever you can. There's a wonderful book on AI. I don't remember. I think it's called Coding Bias or Decoding AI. I'll send the name in. It talks about the world of artificial intelligence and how we are yet to solve ourselves of the bias before we code it again into an algorithm that actually completely goes out of our hand. That's another book that I'd recommend management experts to look at as we deal with a world that is increasingly getting more automated. Also, the balance between dealing with a very labor-rich country in a world that is going to largely be automated is also something that management students will have to think about as being responsible for the largest engines of economic growth. There's also a very wonderful movie that I saw recently. It's a Malayalam movie called The Great Indian Kitchen. It's on Netflix. I don't know if someone, it's a movie that would enrage a woman as much as it would enrage a man, I think, or enrage a man as much as it would enrage a woman, because it in very subtle ways shows the drudgery that women have to deal with on an everyday life. I'm almost reasonably sure that every man who sees it will see a woman that they know in that space, even if it is not their immediate family or spouses or girlfriends or partners. And so I'm really glad that Indian cinema, particularly in the South, is making a lot of feminist films. When I say feminist films, these could be on male characters, but in essence, talk about a more equal world or shows the drudgery of the world on women. So just a couple of quick things to do. I'm available on Instagram as Nishtha Satyam, available on Twitter, available on Facebook. I'm always happy to chat this more. Again, I come from a management background, as much as I've been a bureaucrat and now an international civil servant, but my thinking is very management oriented. So I'd love to discuss more with students, with professors, on what can we do together to get to that goal sooner than we ideally would, because it's costing us every single day. And it's a reality that a super economic power that like India can no longer afford.
Okay, thank you so much for being there, ma'am. And I think Suyash now will give the word of thanks.
Yeah. Hi, on behalf of the entire TRBS team, I would like to thank you for taking out the time to share your thoughts on these varied topics with us. I'm sure that we all will have something to take away from this session today. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank our title sponsor, State Bank of India. TRBS 2021 is powered by GRT Jewelers. We would also like to thank Perfetti Van Mille, our business partner, and Either View, our knowledge partner.